Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the question of whether or not Iron Man 3 might actually work better being placed in 2013. If you saw my earlier video, you know that Amazon.com released the index for the Marvel Cinematic Universe official timeline. While the book isn't coming out until late October, if you look really closely at the index, you can pretty much build out the timeline that we're going to be getting, and Iron Man 3 is most definitely in December of 2013. Now, being someone that liked it better in December of 2012, I was kind of annoyed, kind of confused, until I really looked at all the facts, and it's kind of growing on me. So I want to see what you think. Let me know by the time you finish this video if you're also convinced that 2013 might actually be better. So let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Of course, all during the month of September, I'm running a contest on the channel. To enter, all you have to do is be a subscriber, leave a comment, and the winner will be chosen at random and announced in October. And we'll get to choose from one of these 3 books. So, best of luck. All right. So we've kind of had a hint for quite a while that Disney Plus was placing Iron Man 3 after Thor: The Dark World, because that's where it's been on the timeline. And that's annoyed people, like myself a little bit, thinking, why are you doing this, Disney Plus? And I trust the Disney Plus timeline. I know a lot of people think it's no good, but keep in mind, as I mentioned in the earlier video, the only thing that it's got wrong right now is Shang-Chi and Falcon and the Winter Soldier need to switch places. Otherwise, the Disney Plus timeline is 100% accurate. Wild. Who knew, right? Anyway, I still thought that it's possible to make Iron Man in 2012, even with it being after Thor: The Dark World, because if you look at Thor: The Dark World, it picks up right after that big battle in Avengers in May of 2012, and on the left there you see Thor taking Loki up to see Odin at the end of Avengers, and then at the beginning of Thor: The Dark World, there he is. Immediately picks up after the Avengers finale. So that means the beginning of the movie is in May of 2012. However, the movie then jumps to 2013, which you can see on the calendar there, and they even give us a firm date of November 14th of 2013 when they get poor Dr. Selvig out of jail for his little streaking incident. So it's interesting to remember that back in Phase 1 and even some of Phase 2, they gave us firm dates in the movies. They had no problem doing that. Boy, those days are long gone, right? We got to figure it out with a lot of homework. But nonetheless, for a long time, they did give us dates, and in this case, they're telling us the end of the movie is November 14th of 2013. Okay, great. I thought, therefore, what they were doing was placing Thor: The Dark World before Iron Man 3 to say, hey, we're putting it where the beginning of the movie is. I mean, it basically would sandwich Iron Man 3 in that case, with the rest of the movie ending after Iron Man 3. All right, I didn't necessarily like it, but okay, it works. However, it turns out, nope, it's December of 2013. That's what we're going to see in the timeline book when it comes out. So what does that mean for this movie being a year later than many people, myself included, thought? Okay, we know it's in December, right? Iron Man 3 is clearly in December. There's Christmas stuff everywhere. And it's true, they do show us a date. Remember I mentioned they showed us a lot of dates in Phase 1 and Phase 2, and you can see in this, I'm going to expand it so you can really see it. But even in the movie, it was very visible. You didn't have to zoom and enhance and freeze frame, and it went by in, split second. It was a pretty prominent date. So maybe that is what they were trying to say from the beginning, right? It's 2013. But this is interesting. I did have someone comment on my last video with some very interesting information. So the Broke Geek left this comment, said, it's great that we've now got confirmation as to when Iron Man 3 is set, but before the matter was settled, I reached out to Iron Man 3 co-writer Drew Pearce to get some clarification on the exact year the film was set as part of research I was doing for my Marvelous Synergy series of books, their guides to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Pearce told me that he was working under the assumption that Iron Man 3 takes place roughly 6 to 8 months after the Battle of New York. Very interesting, right? That means the writer was assuming what a lot of people assumed, which was this was taking place in December of 2012. So that still leads to the question then, how did this date get in there? I mean, you could argue a prop guy put the wrong date. Yeah, I guess, but directors are supposed to be looking at this really closely. So does that mean the director had a different vision than the writer? Or is this another one of those cases where Marvel just changed their mind after the script was written and decided, no, we want it in 2013, not 2012? But it seems clear that the writer, at least, thought the same thing that many people did, which was this is in 2012. Okay, well, again, we now know Marvel's saying 2013. So How does this affect other things? Well, one of the biggest comments left was this really seems on the surface to mess up Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I know a lot of people don't view Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as canon. I get that. I do. Until they tell us it's not, I'm assuming it is. So let's look at whether this hurts things. Because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, Episode 1 shows that Grant Ward, one of the main characters, was granted Level 7 access on September 9th of 2013. Once again, they give us these firm dates in Phase 1 and Phase 2. And so that means that the season starts in September of 2013. Also in the same episode is a reference to Extremis. In fact, it's a main plot line of the episode and some of the following episodes. You notice there's Coulson saying Extremis. It's new, completely unstable. So this was frustrating for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans because it means the chronology doesn't work. Because when it was in 2012, Iron Man 3, it was before this episode. Now it would be well after this episode. However, people did notice it doesn't actually reference the movie. It referenced Extremis. I mean, like, for example, Coulson doesn't say, oh, yeah, remember the Stark incident with Extremis? Remember all the people blowing up? Remember Killian? Da-da-da-da-da. No, they just reference Extremis. So it's possible that S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra could have just known about Extremis, been aware of it, even though the movie had not occurred. Because, I mean, obviously, they've been working on Extremis for a while. They mentioned in the movie. It was maybe back as early as 1999. So when it showed up in the Centipede Project, which is what you're seeing here, it could well be that they got copies of it as well. It could work. It definitely could work. It feels a little awkward, but keep in mind, again, they don't reference the movie. In fact, I found this quote very interesting. So executive producer Jeffrey Bell was asked about this connection with Extremis on K-Site TV's site. And the question was, the pilot includes a concept from Iron Man 3. At what point in the process did that come up to tie it all together? Right off the bat, he says, it came up independently. Isn't that interesting? So they literally came up with the idea of referencing the comic book, the concept in the comics of Extremis, independent of Iron Man 3. Well, that makes sense because the stories don't really connect directly. They both reference Extremis, but they don't connect. Well, anyway, he goes on to say, and then we realized that there was a link between what was happening to our character, Mike, and what was happening in the Iron Man movie. There was an opportunity for us to tie it together. This is an example of, wouldn't it be cool if this guy had this and this happened and then an explosion? And we go, what if Extremis was part of that? We talked with the movie guys and they didn't feel like we were just ripping off their idea. And we worked with Marvel Features on it and it was cool. Okay, so it really does feel like this could work. Bottom line, it does not reference the movie, and so the movie can happen after this first several episodes of Season 1. Plus, remember, Extremis continued to show up in the MCU. We saw it in Shang-Chi, one of the fighters was using it. And of course, it was referenced in Secret Invasion that S.H.I.E.L.D. had some of the DNA. So, okay, great. I actually think this isn't a problem and that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is fine, even with it moving to 2013. Another question, do Tony's anxiety attacks make sense 20 months later? You know, again, back to the writer, Drew, saying he thought it was only 6 to 8 months later. Probably that's why he was saying, hey, now suddenly these anxiety attacks that were induced by his traumatic experience in Avengers are now triggering. So a lot of people have said, well, this doesn't make sense 20 months later. It would have happened sooner. This is a problem with it being in 2013. Well, if we look at Mayo Clinic's website, which Mayo Clinic is one of the experts in medicine and treatments, they say that post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, that's what Stark had, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. Here's the key. Post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms may start within a month of a traumatic event, but sometimes symptoms may not appear until years after the event. These symptoms cause significant problems in social or work situations and relationships, and it can also interfere with your ability to go about your normal daily tasks. Well, there you go. I mean, the bottom line is, it may have seemed on the surface to make more sense to be closer to Avengers, but PTSD doesn't necessarily kick in immediately. So, okay, that actually works. And in fact, really, I think he still was suffering at least some sense of anxiety, maybe not anxiety attacks, but at least some anxiety, even in Age of Ultron. Because if you look at what Scarlet Witch did to him, you know, yes, she cast a little spell on him, but she used, I think, his underlying anxiety to give him this vision of everyone dying and being killed. She used the Chitauri to trigger that. And remember, that led to him grabbing the scepter and wanting to build a suit of armor around the world. So I think he actually still had some anxiety. He just didn't have the crippling attacks that we saw in Iron Man 3. He managed to get through that. So, okay, I'm good with that. That makes sense. Probably the biggest issue is what seems a very clear attempt to place this in 2012. So the prelude is on New Year's Eve of 1999, and they tell us that. Now, technically, the prelude also includes, though, New Year's Day of 2000. I'm mentioning that because that will be important. So keep in mind, the prelude is end of 1999, beginning of 2000. Okay. So then when Killian talks about events from that prelude, he does seem to be kind of thinking, trying to remember the exact amount, and he says 13 years ago. Well, a lot of people, myself included, said 1999 plus 13, that's 2012, December of 2012. But I guess if he's just trying to remember, and in fact for him it might be more eventful him stuck on that roof. Remember, sitting up on that roof while everybody else is celebrating New Year's, he was sitting there waiting to see Stark. He might be adding 2000 plus 13 to get 2013. Okay, not perfect, I don't love it, but it works. This one's a little stranger because then Tony, when he sees Maya later in the movie, says, and here you are 13 years later in a dungeon. So he seemingly did the same math Killian did. So he either added 13 to 1989 or to 2000. I guess you could argue either one. But again, I feel it's a little awkward to make it 2013, but still, it works. This one's more fascinating. There's another point where Tony jokes about his fear that there might be a 12-year-old kid waiting in the car when he first sees Maya. He said, please don't tell me there's a 12-year-old kid waiting in the car that I've never met. Now, the reason he said 12-year-old there is because if they conceived the kid, because they had a little bit of an intimate encounter in that prelude, then 9 months later for it to be born, then he would be 12 at this time. Maya then responds and says he's 13. So there's really two ways to take this line. The way I've always taken it is she was joking. She's messing with him, So she added a year, but mainly was trying to be serious and get him scared. But I guess you could look at it as, no, she's correcting him and saying, hey, if you do your math right, he would be 13, which would place the movie in 2013, because again, you add the 9 months to 2000 and you get the 2013. So again, I don't know what to do with all this, but I guess you could actually look at this as being the definitive correction, saying, no, it would be 13 years later. So we're now talking 2013, firmly 2013. Interesting. Let me know what you think about that. That is the strangest part of it being in 2013, is trying to make this math work. But it does. But there are actually some things that make more sense if the movie's in 2013. For example, it would give Tony more time to create his 35 suits of armor. If you remember the movie, he literally was up 35 more marks, versions of his armor. Now, I'm not saying he couldn't do that in 6 to 8 months. He could, especially if he was suffering from anxiety that kept getting worse and worse and worse. He would be tinkering and making more and more suits. But still, 35 new working suits that clearly had been tested, clearly had been used. Giving him 20 months to do that does make more sense. I kind of like that. And I want to give kudos to Quarters Alpha for leaving that comment on my channel and saying, hey, this is another reason that 2013 could work. And I agree. So great point, Quarters. Thank you for observing that. Okay, something else. This maybe solves an issue that's driven me crazy. I've done a couple videos on this, that we can't really tell when Barack Obama was president based on some of the things in Iron Man 3's placement if it's in 2012. But if it's in 2013, oh my, things work so much better. Why do I say that? Well, it seems really clear Barack Obama was president in the MCU. I mean, you have Tony here making the poster, patterned after Obama's famous Hope poster from his campaign run. Of course, Tony makes it all about himself and puts Iron Man there, but still, that seems to imply that he ran for president at least. Then in Avengers, we see Jay Carney, who is, or was, Obama's press secretary. And this, of course, would be May of 2012, implying pretty strongly that Obama was president in May of 2012. I mean, sure, Carney could have been working for a different president. I get that. But this just seems like Marvel saying, yeah, Obama is the president. That we have a ton of references in Luke Cage and some of the other Netflix shows. And I know some people don't consider those canon, but I do. But also, more importantly, this just shows the mindset of Marvel. When they were writing these shows, Obama was president, right? And then lastly, the Empower series, which if you haven't seen it, really good. But the one on Wakanda does show us, quote unquote, the Bible, they refer to it as, for the Wakandan history. And granted, I don't know if it's officially canon. It doesn't mean it's canon just because they think it is. But nonetheless, notice they say Barack Obama was elected president in 2009. So it seems really clear Obama was president. And to be honest, it would be shocking for the MCU to write out of history one of the most popular presidents that's ever been president of the United States. So it makes sense that he would be from 2009 to 2012. However, what was difficult about Iron Man 3 is Matthew Ellis was seemingly president in 2012 if the movie came out in December of 2012, right? So he's stomping on part of Obama's term. So it left you wondering, okay, did Obama die? Did he step down? Was there a scandal? Was he impeached? All of those are just weird ways to end his presidency. However, if Iron Man 3 is in December of 2013, yay! Ellis is now president in a totally different term. And I believe probably was the vice president of Obama, and we'll see why as we go through this. But yeah, this fits so much better to have it in December of 2013. Okay, so let's look at some of the things that still are a little odd, but I think have good explanations. So notice there's this quote. This is actually from the movie Winter Soldier, but it's referring to Cap returning from the ice, which happened in 2011, keep in mind. And this quote, "Welcome back, Cap," is attributed to President Matthew Ellis. Well, that on the surface seems weird because that would mean Ellis was president in 2011, right? Not necessarily. You normally attribute a quote to someone's highest rank, and especially because he would have been president in 2014, it would be weird to put Vice President Ellis. In fact, if you put that, then everybody would be going, hey, that's wrong, he's president. So I'm okay with this quote being attributed to Ellis, even though he wasn't president in 2011. If he was vice president, though, it would make sense that he went to welcome back Cap. So I'm good with that. That works. This is a little stranger, but I think we have to assume Obama put the ban, which they're going to refer to here in Iron Man 3, in place, and Ellis just kept it in place. Because Killian says after years, keep that word in mind, years of dodging the president's ban on immoral biotech research, then he goes on to talk about the fact that now we finally perfected extremis, or they're about to perfect it. So this would work if the president's ban is referring to multiple presidents, right? Obama put it in place, and then Ellis, who was the VP, now became president and kept the ban in place. So, okay, that line actually works. Then this one's a little strange, but again, it works if Ellis was Obama's VP. So Killian says, well, 2 years ago, keep that in mind, 2 years ago, the elephant in the room was this scow. And of course, you'll remember when she spilled 1 million gallons of crude off Pensacola, thanks to you, not one fat cat saw a day in court. Well, obviously, if Ellis had something to do with it, then he had to be in some form of office back in 2012, because he said years ago, maybe even 2011, or 2 years ago, sorry, he said, so 2011. But that makes sense. If he was part of the administration, maybe Obama was like, I don't want to deal with this. And Ellis did. So that works. And then now Killian is saying, I just needed a reason to kill you that would play well on TV. He's basically saying, I don't even care about the scow. I don't care about the crude oil dump. I just wanted to make up an excuse that people would buy for why I'm killing you. So now that he's president, sure, makes sense that he would have chosen him to be the sacrificial lamb on TV. So bottom line is, I think this works great. I think there's actually some major advantages to the movie being set in 2013. Not only the Obama thing, but also the making the 35 Mark armors. So I'm feeling a lot better. I'm wondering if you are now at this point. Let me know what you think, but I really like this. So let's summarize what we've got here. We're talking about Iron Man 3, which I think a lot of people, myself included, thought was in December 2012. We're moving it to December 2013. However, there is one thing I need to bring up that I didn't mention in my earlier video, and that is All Hail the King. Now, All Hail the King had been placed in December of 2013 previously because it was just like a year after Iron Man 3. We really had no idea. There are no hints in it to tell us when it falls, but it clearly is after Iron Man 3. I mean, keep in mind, Trevor needed time to make his friends and his enemies that we see in the one-shot, and also he was on the final of several interviews. So we know it's got to be at least a little bit after Iron Man 3. So I don't know when it is because the timeline book doesn't give us, or the index doesn't tell us months. We just know the general order of things. But I'm going to move it to March of 2014 because I just think that kind of makes sense. It'll give us a couple months distance in time, and so some of those things could have easily happened. But then the question is, what do we do with Captain America Winter Soldier, which right now is in January of 2014. I'll be honest, that placement I've never been happy with. The movie came out in April, by the way, of 2014, and it certainly doesn't look like a winter movie. But to make it work with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's got to be in January. I'm not going to go into why. You can go check out my video where I go through the timeline for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and you'll see, though, that much of the second half of the first season, and the beginning and even later parts of the second season all rely on this movie being in January of 2014. Kind of frustrates me because basically Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. created a timeline that forces Captain America the Winter Soldier to be moved to an awkward setting of January 2014. So it's not the Winter Soldier's fault. This is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for doing a very confusing bit of chronology. The first season's incredible, don't get me wrong, but I've never liked it being in January. Well, guess what? I think it's going to end up moving because if you look at the Disney Plus timeline, which again is very accurate, it shows Iron Man 3, then All Hail the King, then Captain America the Winter Soldier. And I will add that, that analysis on the index indicates that All Hail the King is before Captain America the Winter Soldier in the timeline book. So I think it's got to move back to an April timeframe. Could even be later, but I think it's got to be at least an April timeframe. That really does seemingly mess up the chronology of, again, the second half of the first season and most of the second season. But it's not that it makes the plot messed up. It really doesn't. But it does make a lot of the lines not work. This would retcon a lot of the lines in the show. So, sorry, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans. I think this is another issue, but I don't think it's one that hurts the overall experience. It just changes some of the lines around. All right, there you go. What do you think? Are you happy now with a December 2013 placement for Iron Man 3? I'm happy. No, I don't like the Captain America situation, but again, I blame Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for forcing it to be in January. That is not the movie's fault. That is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. writers' fault. But regardless, that aside, I think it just works a lot better in December 2013. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have concerns with Captain America Winter Soldier moving forward a bit. Love to hear your thoughts. Of course, the rest of the timeline is out on my Google Drive. You can check it out if you want. I will be updating all of it when the timeline book actually comes out, because there may be some other tweaks that need to happen, and I'll go over everything that's changing. But yeah, you can find that out there on the Google Drive if you're interested. All right, so there you go. Leave your comments. Let me know what you think. Don't forget, we have this September contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, and you may get a chance to win. And of course, we have the Discord server, which I always like to mention. And here we are talking about the placement of Iron Man 3 and people being pretty frustrated about it. So let me, especially you all in the Discord server that had all this to say, what do you think? Does this work better? Are you okay with it now? Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.